Well, good evening. How are we doing? You guys are as energetic as all other three sessions. So it's a competition, so you got to be louder by the end of the night, okay? No. Well, welcome. On behalf of One Washington, my name is Larry Gott. I'm one of the co-presidents, and we are super excited for you making the trip here to be here tonight. You're going to be in store for some great stuff, so we'll just dive in because there's a lot to do in 90 minutes. Couple housekeeping items. If you need to use a restroom, you go out those doors and you take a right down the hall, and they're on the right-hand side. If for some reason there is any kind of an emergency, you go out the back doors, you go straight across. There's big sliding glass doors, so that's a good exit. You can also go out the way you came in. These side doors, if you go that way, they also go outside. So that's the exit plan. If you are here tonight with the intent to cause an emergency, I would say don't think about it. We have a highly trained crew who will deal with you quickly, swiftly, and effectively. If you came with that intention, our goal would be actually that you have a change of heart, sit, listen with your fellow citizens, learn together. That's our goal, is that we can all learn together. If for some reason you can't do that, then just simply get up and exit. One last final housekeeping item. There has been different articles about One Washington saying that we are anti-vax. Just for the record, we are not. We are anti-mandate. So if you read an article that starts with that statement or something like that, it is misinformation, and just put it away. So anyway, it's a little bit of housekeeping. All right, so why are we doing this? Why is One Washington doing this? Here's the deal. We believe that we need to restore our constitutional republic. Yep. And it's not for us. It's for our kids and for our grandkids. It's a battle we're in. We're all in it together, right? Yeah. So that's why we're doing this. We've been doing a whole series. Started with the vaccine mandate exemption kind of stuff. And, you know, we've just been trying to adjust as things come up. So that's why we're here tonight. And specifically for tonight, we're focusing on the issue of the potential for vaccine mandates for kids to attend school. The COVID-19 vaccine. That's in play right now. So our goal is tonight we'll get you educated so that you can make the best medical decisions for yourselves and your kids. That's where it belongs, with parents and guardians. And then also that you can learn how to get organized and activated so we can influence what's going on in our government. All right, so that's the goals for tonight. So here's how the evening will flow. I'm going to start with just giving you an overview of the education mandate landscape, just so we all understand what we're playing with, so we can understand how we can be effective in it. So that'll be the first thing. Then we'll transition to the interview session, and that for the people you really came to listen to. But during the interviews, we're going to start at the state level and get everybody up to speed on the criteria that the Department of Health is using to evaluate the vaccine. We've picked 3 that we think are the most critical, and so that's what the panel will be talking about. Then we'll transition to personal. You're going to learn some stuff that a lot of people said, boy, that was heavy. Gosh, I'm really wondering about that. So we also want to address the personal concern. What can you do clinically if you had the vax? Some of our speakers have. Want to give you that. But we also here recognize that it's not just a physical battle. It's also a spiritual battle. And so we're going to talk about that too and give you an opportunity to understand spiritually what's going on. So we're going to have our clinical experts talk about the clinical side. We're going to have our spiritual expert, the pastor, senior pastor here, do that at the end. So that's kind of the plan for the night. Sound good? All right. Well, let's dive in with the education landscape. And so all of us know about the local school boards, right? They are our representative of our voice to do what's best for our kids in terms of how we run the school board, or the school district, sorry. And many of us have been the parent voice at the school boards, right? How many people have gone and talked to the school board? Yes, thank you so much, because it's critical, right? We have to have our voice heard. And any of the school board members that have come or are watching online, thank you for coming to listen, hear the same information. We sent invites to all of them, and a number of them said they would attend. Because again, our goal is let's have a shared conversation with some shared information. That, however, has been futile at times, and here's why. This is a simplified version, but there's a lot of forces at play on the school board. You've got the funding is a big one, right? So both state and federal funding. You've got the OSPI and the Board of Education, the orange box. They're informing the local school boards they're giving them guidance on how to run their school board. And then the other one in the yellow, legislature creates laws in the bottom. The laws in Washington State are RCWs, and then agencies write code, WACs, to say how to enforce that law. And so what happens is the legislature writes laws, and then different agencies write the codes. And so in this particular situation, the key agency is the Department of Health. They are influencing the administrative code. They're also influencing the OSPI and the Board of Education. So naturally, that's a leverage point, right? If we really want to get change, we're going to have to hit these different areas. The Board of Health has hired this group called the Technical Advisory Group, or the TAG, which probably many of you have heard, and their responsibility is to review data and make a recommendation against these criteria that we're going to review. So what we want to do tonight is bring you all up to speed on the process we've asked the TAG to do. Obviously, this is a shortened element of it, but just so we can all be kind of up to speed. Now, here's what's going on, even now, recently. So there's two school districts that I'm aware of. There's Kettle Falls and Richland, and they both just recently said they were not going to follow the mask mandate. The local school board, yeah. So those local school boards listened to their parents, took a vote, and said what's in best interest for the kids is to not make the mask mandate, but it's optional. So they did that. And what's now happening, Chris Reichel from OSPI and others are saying, we're going to cut off your funding, right? So they're going to try to coerce by taking funding away. Thankfully, we've got people like Silent Majority Foundation. This is a group that is doing the legal battle on our behalf, or on our behalf. We've been partnering with them over the last roughly a year, and they're amazing. They are like-minded, they have shared hearts, and they are just doing this to save our freedoms. So I really encourage you to go check them out, Silent Majority Foundation. Donate if you can, support them however you can, because they are just battling on our behalf in the legal environment, which is a key piece, right? We all need to play our part in this whole equation. So they're doing that. Tonight, what we want to do is bring in some more of the science and the data. Again, that should be the source that the TAG and the Department of Health are using for the recommendations around the vaccine mandate for the kids. All right, and so what we want to do is also share that information with all of you. So you have a shared information, and then collectively, this is the activate part, we can all go start speaking to those that are making decisions. And so we've set it up so it'll be easy for you, and Tom Jones, the other co-president, will talk about this at the end, but we've got it set up so you can email some of these key leaders. We've got, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so of the key leaders in these different organizations that you'll click a QR code, and then you can send an email to them. So I think if they get 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 emails, maybe they'll start paying attention. I don't know. But that's part of what we need to do, right? Our Constitution, we the people, we need to get our voice heard. The other thing is the technical information that you'll hear tonight will all be online and available on our website, so don't worry about trying to capture it all, because it's going to be a lot, but it'll be available there. So with that, I think, yeah. Oh, yeah, the other thing is, on the funding side, we may have to get to the point where the way we address the funding is we take kids out of public school. We know that's often not the first choice, but there comes a point where you got to draw a line in the sand and say, no, not on my watch, and you'll hear a lot about that. And so expect more coming from One Washington in the future on other options for schooling and stuff like that. So I think we just got to look at this. We're in it in the long haul. We're going to keep fighting. So thanks for fighting with us, right? We're all in it together. So with that, I'll get out of the way and let you meet the folks that you actually came for. Come on, team. Thank you all. I just noticed, I was talking about legislature and laws before. Rep Young is in the house. Thank you, Rep Young, for coming and representing. And any others that have joined us to share in the learning. So on the panel, we've got Art Moore and Rachel Harter. Art comes with a lifetime of journalism. He's currently working as a senior news editor for WorldNet Daily, and thank you for joining us, Art. And then Rachel Harter has been with One Washington when we started the vaccine exemption workshops, and she's got 14 years in the pharmaceutical industry, and most importantly, she is a God-loving, America-loving mom.
All right, last session, here we go. We're ready. And thank you, Larry. Without further ado, we are so pleased to welcome none other than Dr. Robert Malone and Dr. Ryan Cole.
So apparently you know these guys. So I'm not going to dive deep into their CVs. You've seen it up here, and you seem to know that they have the credentials to talk to us today. But briefly, I think it's interesting. First of all, Dr. Cole is a Mayo Clinic trained, Columbia University Medical School trained pathologist in Boise, whose work is influencing the whole country. Physicians across the country rely upon your diagnostics. And for most people, though, they probably came to know you through a little video where you were talking to Idaho lawmakers. Yeah?
Yep.
It went viral, about 1 million views.
Yep.
So 1 million views on the internet. But then a little later, Dr. Malone blew up the internet. Little podcast with Joe Rogan. Have you seen it? 3 hours? Who watches podcasts for 3 hours? Man, you guys have a lot of time on your hands. But so, Dr. Malone, really pleased that you're here, and we have some questions for you too. So we're going to get to it.
Yes, we do. Okay, thank you, Art. So while you were sitting there, I hope you had a chance to look up at the big screen and take a glimpse into some of the screenshots of just blips out of their CV to get a feel to see that these two gentlemen are absolutely qualified, more than qualified, to speak about everything that's in front of us tonight. So with that said, the one little bit of information that wasn't on the screen was really a glimpse into each of their hearts. So we want to set the tone tonight with the first question being just on that note. So to Dr. Cole and Dr. Malone, will you share with us that glimpse of your heart, your reasons why, your motivation of why you've taken the path of most resistance to speak up regarding these vaccines?
It's the right thing to do. Sometimes you don't choose to do things in life. Sometimes life chooses you to do things. And when this all started 2 years ago, being scientists and being very analytical, we saw things that didn't make sense. And just like you, I have children, and many of you have grandchildren, and it's not about me. And when I saw the things that weren't adding up, I couldn't keep quiet, because what's happening, a lie is a limited idea entertained. And I saw a lot of lies. and they were forcing us to entertain them. And then I saw a lot of fear. False expectations accepted as real. And I thought of my children. I thought, you know, we live in a nation where we're supposed to have free speech, where we're supposed to dialogue, where we're supposed to come together for the greater good. And we were limited in that opportunity to do so. And here we are 2 years later, 2 weeks after flattening that curve. It's about you, it's about your children, it's about your grandchildren, it's about us as a human family and a community of peace and truth, loving people. That's why I'm here.
Thank you.
My name is Robert Malone, and I'm speaking to you as a parent, grandparent, physician, and scientist. I don't usually read from a prepared speech for those of you that have listened to my podcasts. But this is so important, I want to make sure that I get every single word and scientific fact correct. I stand by this statement with a career dedicated to vaccine research and development. I'm also have been a carpenter and a farmhand. I drive a diesel flatbed, run a Kubota tractor, can run a skid loader. Jill and I take care of a 40-acre farm in Virginia with lots of horses. I put on my pants just the same as you do every single day. I've devoted my entire professional career to developing safe and effective ways to prevent and treat infectious diseases. As I said, I'm vaccinated. I was vaccinated for this. I received 2 doses of Moderna, and I'm generally pro-vaccine. It's what I do for a living, in addition to raising horses and bucking bales and everything else. Before you inject your child a decision that is irreversible, I wanted to let you know the scientific facts about this genetic vaccine, which is based on the mRNA technology I created over 30 years ago. There are 3 issues that I think you as parents and grandparents need to understand. The first is that a viral gene will be injected into your children's cells. This gene forces your child's body to make toxic spike proteins. These proteins can cause permanent damage in children's critical organs. These types of damages include damages to their brain and nervous system, their heart and blood vessels, including blood clots, their reproductive system, and these vaccines can trigger fundamental changes in their immune system that Dr. Cole and I will talk about later. The most alarming point about this is that once these damages have occurred, they are irreparable. You can't fix the lesions within their brain. You can't fix heart tissue scarring. You cannot repair a genetically reset immune system. And this vaccine can cause reproductive damage that could affect future generations of your family. The second thing you need to know about this is the fact that this novel technology has not been adequately tested. We need at least 5 years of testing and research before we can really understand the risks of any new vaccine technology and any new vaccine. Vaccines can cause long-term changes in autoimmune disease. This is true for all vaccines. Harms and risks from new medicines often become revealed many years later. You know that. We're all adults here. We've lived it. We've seen it. It's just the nature of pharmaceuticals. Nothing is perfectly safe. It's kind of true in life in general. Okay, we all understand about risks and benefits. Ask yourself if you want your own child to be part of the most radical medical experiment in human history. This is the largest experiment on human beings that has ever been performed in modern history. A final point. The reason they're giving you to vaccinate your children is a lie. It's a big word, 3 little letters. Your children represent no danger to their parents or grandparents. Okay? Sanjay Gupta and Big Bird were wrong. Okay? It's actually the opposite. Their immunity after getting COVID is critical to save your family, if not the world, from this disease. They generate broad natural immunity. That is our best recourse to keep this virus from further evolving to become even more of a superbug and to develop escape mutants. We need those kids to have natural, broad-based immunity for a whole species. In summary, there's no benefit to your children or your family, in my opinion, my professional opinion as a vaccinologist, to be vaccinating your children against the small risks of this virus, which are particularly small with Omicron, given the known health risks of the vaccine that as a parent, you and your children may have to live with for the rest of your lives. If your child is damaged, the pharmaceutical industry is protected. We call it indemnification. They can't be sued. The government isn't going to be sued. Sanjay Gupta is not going to come and take care of your kid. You're going to be stuck. You're the one that's going to have to carry the burden, both in terms of caring for your child, and I've seen these children. We'll talk about Maddie DeGarry perhaps later on, wheelchair bound for the rest of her life. Okay? You're the one that's going to have to take care of that. And you're going to have to deal with it emotionally for the rest of your life. In my opinion, the risk-benefit analysis is not even close. As a parent and grandparent, my recommendation to you is to resist and fight to protect your children. That's why I'm here, as I'm trying to save kids' lives. This is the hill I will die on.
Thank you, Dr. Malone. I just looked around the room as you were speaking, and it's so apparent and easy to see that you just pierced, each of you, into Mama and Dada's hearts. So thank you for setting the stage with your sincerity.
Yeah, I am missing that citation for Big Bird, though. I don't see it here. Well, I'll get that later.
Call it the New York Times.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to move into some questions that are based on the criteria that the Board of Health has when they make a decision about whether or not to mandate a vaccine for your kids in school. And we're picking 3 of the criteria: transmission, effectiveness, and safety. So let's start with transmission. And the obvious question is, do these vaccines reduce transmission, Dr. Cole?
No.
Yeah, this is going to go faster than I thought.
Okay, yeah, it could go fast. I mean, after those moving comments by Dr. Malone, I'm sitting over here all choked up. I'm like, what more do you need to hear? Okay, let's hear a little nerdy science. No, they don't prevent transmission. First, we need to remember that we're on to Omicron. Where did we start? A Wuhan virus. We're multiple variants later. Were these shots designed for Omicron? No. Does policy keep up with science? No. So here we are with a shot that doesn't cover the current virus. So if I give you this shot, say I want you to be immunized against flu, and I say to you, gosh, flu season's coming, we kind of figure out what strains are coming. But by the way, I have some leftover flu shots in the freezer from the variant 5 years ago. Why don't I just give you that one? How many people would volunteer for that? No, nonsense, right? Of course. Well, here we have Omicron, and we want you to get a shot that was designed for Wuhan and was about that effective for it anyway. And now what are the risks? We'll go over that in a bit, but does it prevent transmission? No. If you've had an infection, where does the virus come in? Does it come in through your arm? No, it comes in through your eyes, your nose, your throat. And when you get the shot with this little gene that takes over your cell machinery and makes a spike protein and then makes immune responses to that, you make an IgG antibody and a very weak T cell response. But if it comes in naturally, you make a lot of these little MOPs, these little antibodies called secretory IgA. And so it's interesting to consider the majority of children in the United States have already had COVID. As of June last year, the CDC said 42% of kids have had it. And then what happened after that? Well, Delta, that wildfire, and then Omicron, that wildfire. So most of kids have already had COVID. And do you give a shot to somebody who's already COVID recovered and has immunity? No, why not? Because it increases your risk for adverse reactions. It's called high zone tolerance. You give an excess immune response to somebody who already has immunity, and now you've created problems. 2 to 4 times increase of adverse events. So does it prevent transmission? No. In fact, if you've had the shot and you don't make these little MOPs, studies have shown in Wisconsin, in California, and Vietnam, that those who've gotten the shots carry equal viral volume in their nose, equal to those who are infected. So when they say in order to come to work and be our employee, you have to get tested weekly because, you know, you didn't accept that religious genuflection of a booster every 6 months or whatever. But here's the problem. Those who got the shot can carry equal viral volume. Does it prevent transmission? No.
Dr. Malone.
So building off of that, Ryan has emphasized, to make it really crystal clear, the vaccines were designed against the original Wuhan strain. The original Wuhan strain has engineered sequences in the spike protein that are not natural. Having looked at all these data and read the reports and read the documentation from the DoD that I consult for, I'm completely convinced that this was lab engineered. And there are sequences in there that are still in that spike that are in the vaccine. And the virus has drifted as it's moved through our population. It's changed. It's mutated. Fortunately, this latest mutation, Omicron, is really benign, and Ryan's going to talk about that a little bit more later. It's as Bill Gates, this is somebody that your community knows this name, okay? But the other day he did an interview. It was fascinating. I think he said it was unfortunate or something like that.
Sadly,
Omicron has acted like a vaccine, and it's been all the way through us, and we now have natural immunity, which is superior. But the vaccines produce this really narrow immune response against this spike protein that was engineered in that China lab in Wuhan, and it doesn't generate as good an immune response as your own bodies did, particularly as your own children do. And the data are really clear. Unfortunately, with Omicron, it looks like the vaccines don't stop transmission, and they don't really stop infection, and there's data from many countries, it looks like they may make it so that you're even more likely to be infected. So we'll talk about that, I guess, in the next section.
Whew, Whew, that was deep. Okay, Dr. Cole, this question is to you. With regards to reducing transmission, a common objection we might hear is you don't take the vaccine for yourself. Actually, you take it for others to protect grandma and maybe teachers.
So I kind of touched on this. This is the Big Bird Sanjay Gupta argument. Remember that ad? Okay, break down that ad. What CNN was really saying, and basically they were marketing the vaccine, by the way, which is illegal because it's not a licensed vaccine. Remember, they got a lot of money from Pfizer. So what they were saying in that little ad was that Big Bird needed to go get vaccinated to protect Grandma Bird. Remember that ad? It's fascinating when you break down like the subtext. So did the data show that that's the case? Is it that Big Bird is vaccinating Grandma Bird or infecting her, or is it the other way around? The data show that the kids develop an immune response and recover from the virus really fast, and they shed very low levels of virus. They aren't the ones that are infecting the school teachers. They aren't the ones that are infecting grandma. They're not putting the adults at risk. The data are clear. The adults are putting the children. They're the ones infecting the children, not the other way around. Kids don't have the density of ACE2 receptors. They have super duper immune systems. All the moms know that. Anybody that's had a kid in preschool knows what they go through. Okay? So that whole storyline that we've been fed, and think about it. Bobby Kennedy said this really eloquently down in Louisiana when we testified. When in the past have we asked children to sacrifice to save their parents? The way this is supposed to work is we're supposed to be protecting them. So the whole logic is completely wrong, and it's not supported by the science.
All right, tonight I'll be really sleepy, but I'll have you take my sleeping pill for me. Doesn't work, does it? And what Sanjay Gupta didn't say to Big Bird is B is for blood clotting, M is for myocarditis, C is for cancer, S is for stroke. So there are risks. And that's the point is, what is a vaccine supposed to do? An immunization gives you immunity. And what are we seeing with these shots? Are they providing immunity? No. Like Dr. Malone just said, the chance of getting Omicron after having had 1, 2, or 3 shots is now higher in those individuals in numerous studies in numerous countries. It actually enhances the opportunity to acquire disease. I always thought, with all the shots I got as a kid and the ones Uncle Sam stuck in my arm when I was in the military, that I had immunity to diseases. Well, if you have to get 1 shot, oh, that didn't quite work, you got to get 2. Oh, no, you got to get 3. Well, booster palooza, here comes number 4. Is that an immunization, or is that a therapy? Right, it's a therapy. So to be told that we're giving you something that may decrease your symptoms a little bit, that's not an immunization. And when we know, as Dr. Malone mentioned, that spike in and of itself has toxic side effects on multiple organ systems in the body, the risk and the benefit are upside down. Why would we put this in our children? And most of them have had COVID. They're immune. Thank you. Sorry.
No, thank you. So just to clarify, to finish out the transmission or reduction in, is it fair to say that the reduction in transmission with regards to the Omicron strand is non-existent?
Yes.
Thank you. We'll move on to effectiveness.
Okay, so there is widespread acknowledgement that it's not stopping, that we're talking about the Moderna, the Pfizer vaccines, they're not stopping infection, not preventing that. They're not stopping transmission or even reducing transmission. Okay, so what we're left with is that the argument is that, okay, it reduces the severity of the illness, it reduces the chance of me going to the hospital, it reduces the chance of me dying, And there's a social aspect of it in that it prevents or it reduces the chances of my local hospital being overrun and people having to be treated in tents. Okay, so what about that argument that we're left with? What do you think?
Well, again, policy keeping up with science is an interesting game. Omicron is a kitty cat, the other variants were tigers. So show me one hospital that's overwhelmed right now. They say, oh, we're overflowing with patients. Well, how many of these hospitals laid off people that stood up for their bodily integrity? Most of whom were heroes for a whole year, probably had COVID, had broad natural immunity from having had the disease. So do we have an emergency? Do we need to, take one for the team and put our bodies at risk? No. So does it prevent transmission? No. Does it prevent acquisition? No. Does it prevent disease, these shots? No. Does it prevent death? Well, 99.99% of people that are healthy and well under age 65 do fine with the virus anyway. And if you give them early treatment, they do even better. So to say a shot is a treatment has never been true in medicine. You always do something preventatively before something starts to spread. And to Dr. Malone's point, and Dr. Vanden Bosch's point, you do not vaccinate in the middle of a fast-spreading virus, period. So it's scientifically imprudent and downright illogical. Need I say dumb?
Yeah, I'd like to just amplify on that a little bit. So he mentioned the layoffs, and we've all seen it, and how irrational it is. But I'd just like to pick at that a little bit. You remember when they were talking about how the red states will all be flooded with the children going to the hospital? Because here we're talking about the children. Remember that? That was fear porn. Because the kids that were hitting the hospital were having respiratory syncytial virus, which, by the way, is another lab leak. Okay? It emerged in the population of the 50s in Silver Spring, probably, from a government laboratory. So, then we heard the story about the flooding of the hospitals with ivermectin toxicity. Remember that one? Another false story. Hospitals in the United States, because the profit margins are tight, tend to run at 90 to 95% capacity. And so they get pumped up a little bit, and the press goes wild and says, oh, they're all been overloaded. That's just not true. And it's being used as a way to use fear to manipulate us. Okay? So this whole storyline about the overwhelmed hospitals. I used to work with the CIA agent that was the guy that designed all those 10 hospitals in New York City. You know what happened with those 10 hospitals and the Mercy ship? They were empty. Okay? And that was at the worst peak in the worst city. So this whole logic that we have to do it because the hospitals are getting overwhelmed, it just falls apart when you look at it. It's not true. And with Omicron, if you look at the curves, we've had a peak, very little death, really. By the way, the majority of the people worldwide that have died with Omicron have been vaccinated. The majority of the people in hospital have been vaccinated. Now, it's a little tricky because most of the people in the world have either been infected or vaccinated already, okay? So it's kind of hard to figure out, but certainly it's crystal clear that this vaccine is not protecting people. And by the way, most of those folks that are in the hospital have other major problems. Probably a good chance a lot of them would have already been in the hospital. And we've seen this. I'm a vaccinologist, an infectious disease guy. We've been battling this with flu for decades. I mean, the flu, unfortunately, takes the elderly and the weak. And this is another respiratory RNA virus, just like flu, that evolves, mutates, escapes vaccines, just like flu. So, in my opinion, this whole storyline really reflects kind of media bias and manipulation. It's not grounded in fact.
Yeah, wonder if you could address something that we're hearing in the media. So you said that most of the people who are in the hospital for COVID are vaccinated. Is that right? Okay, so the argument might be...
That's worldwide.
Sorry?
That's worldwide. That's not just the United States.
Okay, so, but the argument might be that a majority of the population has been vaccinated, so you'd expect that.
What I just said.
Okay.
Yeah, so sorting that out is so we call this confounding variables is the thing that we're wrestling with. And so we can get into this argument about the population sizes and the relative distribution and what the statistics show, but I think all of us can get it. Anybody that went through Christmas break with their family and saw, groups of people coming together for Christmas, and the vaccinated ones were getting infected, and it was moving through their family quickly. And a lot of times they seem to get it worse than the unvaccinated, and they get it faster. And when something like 80+% of the people that are in the hospital have been previously fully vaccinated, well, clearly the vaccines aren't protecting against hospitalization, and the same is true with death. Now, is there a big difference between, where we argue this is the angels on the head of the pin argument, is natural immunity versus vaccine-induced immunity, and which provides the better protection. And there's, I think, over 140 papers?
150 papers, Dr. Paul Alexander, brownstone.org, that natural COVID-recovered immunity is far better than a vaccine immunity.
So I take your point, and this is what the press likes to pick at, is these subtle nuances, and one of the reasons is because it's really hard to prove. And the reason why it's so hard to prove is we have really crummy data, because there's a great big government organization down in Atlanta that's supposed to be giving us good data, and they haven't done their job. And so because we don't have good data coming out of the CDC, all of us get turned on each other, and the press picks at things and says, well, you can't actually prove that, and what about VAERS this, and blah, blah, blah. And we end up down in these, down these rabbit hole arguments about what this means versus what that means. But you all know the truth. You can see it in your daily lives. You can see it in your families. Are the vaccines protecting your families against infection, replication, and spread of Omicron? And most people, at this point in time, have a pretty clear understanding of that from their own practical experience. And that is the ground truth. So now the good news is Omicron is almost done. And the graphs show it. Dr. Jill Glasspool here in the front row, who is my partner and fellow conspirator all the way through this, coworker. She monitors these things every day. She wakes up, has a cup of coffee, and pulls up One World data. And the Omicron curve for incidence has just about completely crashed in the United States. So let's hope that Mr. Gates is right, and it is functioning as a vaccine, and we've all received a mucosal vaccine, whether we wanted it or not, good and hard. So that's the truth.
Okay. Rachel, I was listening to Larry introduce you, and if I got this right, you're Big Pharma or something like that?
Well, actually, I was terminated for not taking the vax, so no, but thank you.
But you have a question, because you do have a pharmaceutical background.
Yes, I do.
You've got a question about the clinical trials.
Yeah, I'm going to point my question to Dr. Cole. So now that we've had an opportunity to look into the Pfizer trials, we obviously know that it's an emergency use authorized medication. What are your big concerns within the study design and the outcomes?
Okie dokie, thank you. Study design. So it's interesting that companies get to do their own study, produce their own data, and say, hooray, look, it works. We're not going to have anybody independent review it. By the way, here's a big paycheck if you authorize it, because FDA is almost 50% funded by pharma. So this pattern is interesting. So how effective is it? All right, this is why I'm doing this. That's my blonderage. This is the next generation. I guess my son-in-law isn't blonde, but that's okay. That's my blonderage. That's why we're fighting for the next generation, for their health, for their wellness. First do no harm was an oath I took. Now, pharma didn't take that oath, and a lot of federal regulators didn't take that oath. But in our hearts, that's what we are. First, do no harm, physical, financial, psychological. That's an oath that matters to us and should matter to any and every healthcare provider forever. And if your doctor thinks that MD means minor deity, find a new doctor. To us, MD means make a difference. So in a normal study, you take your drug shot group and you compare it to a placebo group like you see up there on the left. Well, what happened here? Well, not too shortly after they rolled these things out, they took all those blue people and said, oh, we'll give you the shot. Now what happened to your placebo group? Gone. Forever. So now how do you compare outcomes? Now all you can say is, well, they work because we say so. Well, what happens 6 months out when you look at this group? Some interesting things. Now, this is all at the Canadian COVID Care Alliance. You can watch the whole video and watch the very in-depth presentation. You don't have to, memorize or take notes.
By the way, putting this on Twitter is what got me delisted.
Because the truth is a dangerous thing. So you go from 500,000 followers to 50 million listeners on Joe Rogan. Pretty good. And he has a great Substack, by the way. So now 6 months out, who had more adverse outcomes, the placebo group or those who got the shot in the Pfizer data? 300% increase in adverse reactions in those that got the shot. And you can read the rest of the data later. And then how many people died in the shot group versus the placebo group? More. How many of those died from heart conditions in the shot group versus the placebo group? More. Yet they got authorized. So when I look at that data and do an assessment, I say to myself, safe? Effective? No. And this is the problem in the regulatory realms as well as the data realms. And as Mark Twain said, there are lies, there are damn lies, and there are statistics. And these statistics don't look very good for the pharmaceutical industry. And here's the other trick they played. Who dies from this disease? The elderly. 85% of the deaths were at 75 years of age and older. How many of those individuals were included in this brief 2-month trial? 4% of that whole group were in that elderly age category. But everybody that was in the trial was generally young, healthy, and well, and there were no COVID-recovered individuals in the trial. So they couldn't measure for adverse outcomes in those who had already had the disease. So if I were designing this trial and I did this, I wouldn't be sitting up here. I would be wearing some orange pajamas with some handcuffs behind some bars right now.
No, it's true. So I do clinical research for a living. That's a big part of my business. And if I pulled this trick, and there's more, there's whistleblowers, these data are further manipulated, and that's coming out in the court of law, I'd lose my ability to practice my profession. The FDA would make it so that I couldn't practice clinical research in the future. I don't know how they've gotten away with this, but I know that I couldn't get away with it.
Yeah, as a mom, no matter how many times I've gone into that data, my blood boils, my heart rate goes up. It's just infuriating that they essentially rigged the study design. The control group, the vaccinated group, or the unvaccinated group, the control arm, was then vaccinated. So they compromised the control arm, so now we do not know what we're doing to our child's bodies with regards to long-term safety for the Omicron variant.
Absolutely correct. And keep in mind, this was for the original variant, and again, we're multiple variants later, wrong shot, wrong virus, wrong data, and most of the kids have had it already. So what the heck are we doing?
Amen.
Yeah, so we've touched on safety in a number of different ways, but we really want to focus on that right now. And I want to start with Dr. Malone. So first of all, you were the key inventor of the mRNA technology platform, which is in the vaccines that are produced by Pfizer and Moderna. You didn't make the vaccines.
Yeah, I did not invent these vaccines. We're just clear on that. And I also didn't invent mRNA, okay? mRNA is a fundamental biologic molecule that we all have in all of our cells.
Okay, so, but there are a lot of people in your field, people that you've worked with, and they wonder what happened to you, why you're not, preparing to go accept your Nobel Prize for, this great thing that you've invented. And so, I just from that standpoint, the knowledge that you have of these vaccines and in the 30 years of work, and I think the invention went back when you were 28 years old. Yeah, so you've been at this for a long time and had success early on. So a lot of your critics are really perplexed. Why are you coming out against these vaccines that you were so critical in helping bring about?
Right, so this question. Basically, it comes down to because it's the right thing to do. It's not the only thing I've done in my life, and we produce some pretty good horses too. But we've had other inventions. There's other companies that have spun out other technologies, other vaccine technologies. I first got lit up when I became aware of how badly the system had been distorted, about how many corners had been cut. And if you followed the podcasts, some of you have. Sometimes people say, I've listened to every one of your podcasts, and I always say, I'm so sorry. It's been a lot. So for me, it's been a gradual awakening too, like a lot of you. Remember, I took the vaccine. When I took it, we didn't know what we know now. Okay, so for me, it's been a journey of learning and watching the data. But it was started because Jill and I have both been well-trained in bioethics. And forcing a vaccine that is not licensed, is not fully approved, on people without their approval, without their authorization, without full informed consent, is illegal, in my opinion. The federal law is called the Common Rule. That's the slang that's used for it. It goes all the way back to the Nuremberg Code. So the combination of cutting all these corners in the preclinical package before it ever went into humans, and the bioethics is what got us started on this. But I'm going to summarize some key points about these vaccines that make them very different from the vaccines that your children normally take. Number one, these are slipping a gene, a genetic element, into the cells of your child's body. They are gene therapy applied to vaccines. Okay, I can say that because I invented it. Okay, and that is how it came to pass. I was working in a gene therapy lab. The method that it's used to slip the RNA into your child's cells is to coat them with a fat. That fat technically is called a cationic lipid. What that means is it's positively charged. It's a synthetic chemical compound. It's different than anything that's in your cells or your child's cells. Most of the lipids, the fats in the cells of your child, are positive or neutral, like cholesterol. Negative or neutral. These are positively charged, synthetic. And in the limited data that they did do, they showed that when you inject these into rodents, they go all over the body. That's not supposed to happen. They didn't think that was what was going to happen. And oddly, they particularly go to bone marrow and perhaps most remarkably, places that you wouldn't expect. They go to bone marrow and they go to the ovaries. They go to ovaries more than they go to the testis by a far shot. Ovaries are what controls women's reproductive health. Women know this. They control menstruation. That's where the eggs are. Remember, your child, when they're born, your daughter has all the eggs she's ever going to have. So these lipids are going to be going to her ovaries. The lipids are synthetic, not natural. The RNA that's being used is not a natural RNA. You can think of RNA like a pearl necklace, beads on a string. And unlike computer code that's zeros and ones, RNA has 4 bases, 4 code elements, A, U, G, C. And what was done was substitute a chemically synthesized, odd, unusual U of the 4 bases. It's called pseudouridine. When they engineered, the big discovery of Carrico and Weissman is that if you put pseudouridine into the RNA, it won't evoke as much an immune response. It suppresses the immune response. And at the time, that seemed like a good thing. It suppressed the inflammation that these complexes triggered, that Jill and I fought for over a decade in the laboratory, trying to develop things that would be less inflammatory. You put this synthetic chemical base into the RNA, pseudouridine, it becomes less inflammatory. It turns out that it also makes the RNA last for a very long period of time. Normally, RNA only lasts in your cells for an hour or 2. But these RNAs last for up to 60 days or more. We don't know how long they last. So the lipids are different, like nothing your child's body's ever seen. The RNA is not natural RNA. These vaccines have not been well tested. They weren't tested well before they went into your child, before they went into the old folks and then worked down now into children. And all of that preclinical stuff about how long they stay in your body and how much protein gets made and all the things that you normally have to test weren't done. So the rigorous testing on these vaccines was not performed. So what made me get alerted about this? I saw the bioethics weren't right. I saw the preclinical testing wasn't right. And then I started to see the problems with the spike protein. This spike protein is not like in a regular coronavirus. Did you know that you've all been infected by circulating coronaviruses? What do they cause? The common cold. Okay? But these coronaviruses are different. SARS-1 was really lethal, but didn't infect very many people. SARS-2, I'm completely convinced, is a laboratory-engineered pathogen. And it has this furin cleavage site, and it appears to have what's called a superantigen that's been engineered into there. And that same engineered spike is what they use in the vaccines. Okay? So the spike protein itself has toxicities. The cationic lipids go to places they shouldn't go. The RNA sticks around way longer than it should. And the whole idea of forcing all this stuff on us without good, rigorous testing, and most particularly, we were all grown-ups. We understand, we took some risks, you know. We were all chased by fear, and we did these things. But for God's sake, don't let them force your kids to be vaccinated. That's why I'm here, and that's why I got involved in this.
I want to underscore what you said about the length of time that this mRNA stays in your body. You were alluding to a study that just came out that was published by the journal Cell, Stanford researchers, because that is something that goes against what we've heard, that supposedly it just goes away.
This is one of the things the FDA should have worked out before they started jabbing it at all of us, okay? They should have looked at the biodistribution, that means where does these things go, really rigorously, and they should have looked at how much protein gets made and where it gets made. Where does the protein go, the spike protein? They didn't do it. Now, recently, a group of researchers at Stanford University published a peer-reviewed paper in Cell. Cell is probably the top academic journal for this kind of biomedical research and cell biology in the world. So this is not, third-tier stuff. just for the fact checkers, when they review this, the article is titled Immune Imprinting, Breadth of Variant Recognition, and Germinal Center Response in Human SARS-CoV-2 Infection and Vaccination. The first author is Katarina Roltgen. It was published on January 24th. I'd like to talk, Art, about some of the findings of the actual biodistribution and pharmacokinetics. What these researchers at Stanford found was prolonged detection of vaccine mRNA in lymph node germinal centers. Okay, what's that? The women in the audience that have had to go in for breast cancer screening know that they're asked by their radiologist, have you recently had the vaccine? Why is that? Because the vaccine is causing swollen lymph nodes in their armpits. That swelling of those lymph nodes is due to germinal centers, which is the clusters of B and T cells where they're getting educated and they're expanding, and that causes the lymph node to swell. Okay, so we're talking about lymph node germinal centers after vaccination. Prolonged detection of vaccine mRNA in these tissues and spike antigen and in blood following SARS-CoV-2 mRNA vaccination. Detection, including the proper controls of this vaccine RNA, can be found 7 to 60 days after the second dose of either of these RNA vaccines. They only test it out to 60 days, so it could be longer. We don't know. But they're detecting it for at least 60 days. They detected vaccine mRNA collected from these. This is what Ryan does as a pathologist. He gets samples of tissues, fine needle aspiration, of germinal centers of lymph nodes on days 7, 16, and 37 post-vaccination, but with lower but still appreciable specific signal at day 60. That's a fancy way of saying the RNA sticks around at least 60 days, maybe longer. Next key point, immunohistochemical staining for spike antigen. Okay, that's another thing he does in his lab routinely. This is a service that he does, and it's detecting those proteins, specifically in the tissues. Immunohistochemical staining for spike antigen in mRNA-vaccinated patient lymph nodes varied between individuals, but showed abundant spike protein in germinal centers 16 days after the second dose, with spike antigen still present as late as 60 days post the second dose. These are in the vaccinated people. Okay, well, so it sticks around a long time, it's there at a high level, the RNA is still there, the protein's still there. Well, what makes this different from regular infection? Is this any different? We're all getting infected, what about that? COVID-19 patient lymph nodes showed lower levels of spike antigen and rare germinal center positive staining. You're getting more spike protein produced in your body from the vaccines, and it's lasting for a longer period of time than you get when you're naturally infected. How much more? Spike protein was detected in the plasma of 96% of the vaccinees at day 1 to 2, 63% at day 7, and continuing on for 60 days. In 96%, that's detected. That doesn't mean it wasn't there in the other ones. That's just the laboratory assay. In contrast, so now we're going to talk about regular infection. Spike was only detected in 5 out of 64 infected and COVID-19 positive patients, which is 7.8%. So now we finally get the data that the FDA should have insisted pharma produced before they ever started jabbing it in us. And what we find out is that these synthetic RNAs are sticking around in your child and in your body for at least 60 days. They're producing more protein than you would have gotten from the infection. And as Ryan has tried to coach you on, when you get infected, it's in your nose, in your mucosa, your upper airway, in your mouth, and it gradually builds as the infection develops. What happens when you get the jab is you get this sharp spike, and it's going all over in your blood. It's going in your tissues, and it's sticking around for a long period of time. That's very, very different from what happens with a natural infection. And now the picture is getting a lot clearer about why we're seeing all these adverse events with the vaccines that are coming on a little stronger than we would have expected compared to what we're seeing, especially with Omicron. That makes sense? I hope so.
Yeah.
That's a lot of, I just gave you a lot of data.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and we can't, not all of us can follow that as closely as others. But what is clear, I can understand it. So
I got it.
what's clear is that this is not what we were told. And I want to move into something that's a little more, even more explosive. And that's the data that we have on a website called VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. The purpose for that website is to catch things that were missed in the clinical trials. And basically we're looking for signals, we're looking for safety alerts. And we know that to date, there are more than, is it 24,000, Dr. Cole, deaths? Okay. Now, the argument is going to be, well, this data is not reliable. Dr. Walensky, who is the CDC director, she said in a Senate hearing that you get a shot, you walk across the street, you get hit by a car. That's a vaccine adverse event. Okay? So,
only if that car had like a needle painted on the side of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I want to hit on that, okay? Just a minute, I'm going to...
Okay.
So the thing is that these vaccines do affect mental status fairly frequently. We call it brain fog. And that particular argument that she made, okay, it could actually be vaccine-related.
Yeah, brain fog.
It could, but you're messing up my illustration. Okay. So, but here's the point, and let's just come right down to the point. So Dr. Walensky and Dr. Fauci were asked by a senator, okay, here we have this data. How many, tell us please, you are the people who are the keepers of our safety. Tell us how many people have died. How many people have gone to the hospital? How many people have had these different kinds of severe diseases? And they didn't have an answer, okay? Now we're coming to something that is brand new. Dr. Malone, you woke up this morning and looked at the news, and you found something very, maybe it wasn't shocking. I'm going to ask you, what was your reaction to, tell us what the news was that relates to what I'm talking about, and what was your reaction to it?
It was a busy morning. Jill and I both jumped up out of bed when we saw these data, and we haven't stopped since.
I was putting my tie on. He's like, Ryan, have you seen this? Have you seen this? I'm like, what? I'm waking up. And he showed it to me. I'm like, oh boy. So buckle your seatbelts. This is interesting.
So here's the bombshell that the New York Times dropped on us today. Remember, this is New York Times, okay? The New York Times all the way through this thing has been government apologists, okay? The title is, "The CDC isn't publishing large portions of the COVID-19 data it collects." You get that? Okay. They have been hiding intentionally data from us, and data from us as physicians and scientists, not just from you. And the reason that they're giving, that they've hidden this data, is they didn't want to cause vaccine hesitancy, which is about as paternalistic as I can imagine. I mean, by hiding this data, they've biased the medical boards that are trying to attack us, the press that is constantly telling us that we've been lying to you. They have hidden this data because they didn't want you to know it for some reason. I'm going to read a little bit from this, because this is so important. Steve Bannon just went crazy when he saw this morning. 2 full years into, this is a direct quote, 2 full years into the pandemic, the agency leading the country's response to the public health emergency has published only a tiny fraction, this is New York Times, a tiny fraction of the data it has collected. Several people familiar with the data set. Now, what that means, you don't deal with the press all the time, I do. Several people have said what that means is they got multiple sources from the CDC saying the CDC has withheld this data, but none of them had the courage to actually give their name. Okay? So they're telling the New York Times, something's going wrong here, but we're not willing to let you use our name. So the New York Times had to go to multiple ones, and they all said the same thing. And then the New York Times said, okay, we can publish this. That's what that means. Much of the withheld information could help state and local health officials better target their efforts to bring the virus under control. Boom. Okay? And remember, this commission that is making decisions and advising your governor is making those decisions right here, New York Times, without all the data. Okay? Can they make an informed decision without all the data? I mean, this is, right? This is pretty clear. Now, here's the thing that really lit me up. I'm going to kind of tease this apart a little bit as I talk about it. This is a direct quote. The CDC is a political organization as much as it is a public health organization, said Samuel Scarpino, Managing Director of Pathogen Surveillance at the Rockefeller Foundation's Pandemic Prevention Institute. Okay, I'm going to pick that apart. The Rockefeller is one of the, been here for years and years and years, and they are deeply embedded into the government, tight as ticks with the CDC. They're like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, only older, okay? They actively promote the party line, whatever it is. They are really deeply hooked in to the pharmaceutical industry. So this is a guy working for this non-governmental organization that's deeply tied to the pharmaceutical industry, totally plugged into the CDC. And he's saying these things because the people in the CDC don't have the courage to actually say it themselves and let their names be associated. Unlike us, sitting up here day after day, trying to give you truth and taking all the arrows. Here's what he says. The steps that it takes to get something like this released are often well outside of the control of many of the scientists that work at the CDC. Okay, that's the last one I'm going to quote, and I'm going to pick that apart for you. What he's saying, what we've got here, is a non-governmental spokesperson for the official public health science community is literally throwing Rochelle Walensky under the bus. He's saying the gubbies, the appointed politicos at the CDC, have been restricting access to data for all of us, including the medical health professionals, including your public health officers, including your commission, for political purposes. And that, my friends, is scientific fraud. That is scientific fraud.
So, Dr. Malone, you obviously, just hearing you talk about this sounds like a really big deal. What, going forward, what is your hope that will happen?
Oh, that's a big one. So I'm increasingly, Jill and I live about an hour and 15 south of the Capitol. And we find ourselves spending more and more time working with particularly with the senators. There's a number of senators that are really pretty upset about this. And I think with this bombshell, they're going to be even more upset. I hope they will. They sure should be. We're increasingly focusing on public policy because I think that we're going to face the need to really rebuild the entire health and human services infrastructure.
Okay, with that, we're going to take a quick detour into the lab. So, Dr. Cole, we know that you're a pathologist. Lucky for me, I got to see a little glimpse of that with you yesterday as we were having lunch. you told me that one of the hardest parts of your job is you don't just look at tissues and cells, that you actually see the human. And that really resonated with my heart. That said, will you just share with all of us, what are you seeing right now in the lab?
You know, this has been the interesting just journey that I've had throughout this, and the data that's being withheld from you makes itself abundantly clear before my eyes. We as pathologists tend to be the first one to detect patterns and changes. And my job is to be the most important doctor that you never meet, that you always hope is right. So every day I wake up, I have to get 100% on the quiz in front of me, or somebody may have a bad outcome. So I take what I do very, very seriously, because every piece of tissue, every tube of blood is a human being. I noticed this year changes. Little bump that kids usually get, little virus causes it. All of a sudden I was seeing it in 80-year-olds and 70-year-olds and 60-year-olds as the shot rolled out. And I thought, gosh, this is odd. Now, I've only done this for almost 3 decades and only seen 500,000 patients in my career, which is maybe a little bit. So I know patterns. And as I'm looking at this pattern, I think, oh no, immune dysregulation. Houston, we have a problem. So what Rochelle Walensky and friends weren't telling you, I was seeing, and I started saying, we do have a problem. We have immune dysregulation. And we have, you know, I won't go into all the science nerdy detail. It's kind of fun, but I won't. But I realized certain things were getting turned off. Now your T cell, your innate immune system, these Marines that fight off disease and infection all the time in your body, first one's in, boom, 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 bad cell, bad infection, bad cancer, kill it, kill it, kill it. What these shots are starting to do is say, hey, Marines, you can just be drunk in the barracks and don't worry about anything. Now we're seeing this uptick in all these different viral conditions. And then the scary thing happened. I started seeing women's health cancers start to bump up, and I thought, oh, now we really do have a problem. At rates that I haven't seen before. And so I start calling some colleagues around the country. Hey, what are you seeing? Well, gosh, I'm seeing a lot of micro blood clots in my biopsies in the gut and in the skin. I'm like, me too. And then I start talking to my colleagues around the country as we travel and share and try to put all this data together that the government doesn't want to give you, and we're trying to put the puzzle together. It's like the blind man describing the elephant. You know, it feels like this, looks like that, but I'm not sure. So we're all trying to get together and aggregate this data. And then I talk to oncologists and surgeons and radiologists, and they're like, yeah, I'm seeing cancers taken off like wildfires in ways that I've never seen before. This is a cancer I've kept in check for, 30 years I've seen this type of cancer, and I can always give this patient 5 or 10 years, no problem. And now they get a shot, a second shot, a third shot, and in 4 weeks they have stage 4 cancer all over their body. Everybody? No. But a dysregulation in the cells and the cell lines that moderate all these things, you bet. That's what we're seeing. And we need to continue to study this, and I'm concerned.
I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. Ryan I'm partially trained in pathology, and I taught pathology for over a decade at 3 different medical schools. Ryan has been trained by the top skin pathologist in the world. He's come out of one of the top pathology programs in the world at the Mayo Clinic. He's highly trained, and what pathologists are trained to do is to serve as the quality control system for the entire medical and hospital system. That's what we do. We're trained to recognize patterns when things happen that aren't normal. And we're trained to do this through looking at specimens, but particularly through autopsies. That's why we do autopsies. That's why we've done autopsies for centuries. It's the backbone of medicine and of medical quality control. That's what makes pathologists different from the regular doc that you see, or even the surgeon. We're partners, and our role in this process is pattern recognition and quality control. So what's happened to the autopsy, Ryan?
Well, Anthony Fauci told our government to tell people don't do autopsies on COVID patients. You cannot find that for which you do not look. I have a post-vaccine 9-year-old on my desk, dead. I don't want to see one more child post-vaccine ever on my desk. Are the autopsies starting to happen? You bet they are, finally, because people are saying, well, why wouldn't we do them? And in that same town from which this 9-year-old died, a healthy 22-year-old wrestler, after his third shot, is now also coming to be on my desk so I can determine the cause of death there. We're told, don't do autopsies, don't look, and that's what your government is giving you for data. Don't ask, don't tell, don't look. These are not the droids you're looking for. Everything is safe and effective. Go jab up the children with a shot that doesn't work for a virus that isn't here anymore, for a virus that most of them are already recovered from. Safe and effective. Don't do science. Don't ask a question. Destroy the careers of those that do ask a question, that are only in it for humanity. Valid questions to ask yourself.
So we know that we have just covered the tag team criteria of transmission, effectiveness, and safety. With the tag team review, do you think there's any other data sets that they'd be looking at with regard to these criteria that would be different from what we've spoken about tonight?
Well, if they have any different data, I sure would like to review them, knowing that they don't have all the data based on what we heard today. You cannot make a good decision if you don't have all the information. So I would question any data they brought forth. I'm happy to review it, and they can review my data. And if they want to go to globalcovidsummit.org, they can find countless studies as to why these shots are not for the children. And I will sit, it's a hill I'll die on with my friend, because this is about a generation that should not be harmed with something they do not need.
So I know you both have touched on this briefly throughout all of our questions, but I just want to ask it again. So we know that most children have been infected and have since recovered. So to that point, does natural immunity meet the tag team criteria when you look at natural immunity?
Natural immunity is far better than a vaccine therapy. There are 150 studies on this published at brownstone.org, published by Dr. Paul Alexander, a friend and colleague of ours. Studies out of Israel, post-COVID vaccine, or post-COVID recovered is 13 times better than a vaccine immunity. Studies out of Qatar, 27 times better. Far, far better. Natural immunity, your God-given immune system, is providing a broad, durable, long-lasting immunity. SARS-CoV-1, individuals that had SARS-CoV-1 are immune. They have T-cell memory 18 years later. This virus is 80% similar to SARS-CoV-1. Why would the immune system be any different? So yes, natural immunity is far better, far, far better. And you saw it at Christmas time, like he said. I got my shot. Why did I get COVID? Well, because it wasn't an immunization providing immunity. So absolutely broad, long-lasting, very long-lasting, and durable.
Dr. Malone, you said that you've been vaccinated, and obviously many people have, probably in this room, and I wonder if you have anything that you might want to say to somebody who has concerns. They've heard a lot of things that might cause concern, and is there anything clinically that people could do or otherwise?
So there is, and Ryan will talk about some of the resources that exist, but I'd just like to talk a little bit about my story, because I get this question all the time. Dr. Malone, when you know all this stuff and you know all about this technology, why the heck did you take the jab? And I think a lot of us have been through this. So I made a decision back early on when they were first rolling them out, and the National Guard was deploying them in our little region of Virginia, our little tiny rural county. And all they had available was Moderna. Turns out that Moderna is 3 times the dose of Pfizer, and it has a lot more adverse events. But that's what they had. And I had long COVID. I was infected in the first wave in Boston in March, actually the end of February of 2020, and it hit me hard. That was the strain that was particularly virulent that had come out of Italy. And I can tell you it was no fun at all. I could hardly walk up the hill without having to pause, couldn't do the farm work anymore. Not a nice thing. And I got long COVID afterwards. At the time, there was no drugs. I actually discovered famotidine by self-treating myself, Pepsid. That's another story. But I wasn't adequately treated, so I got long COVID. Now, people that get good early treatment generally don't get long COVID, but that was then. And the rumor was, and it was pushed in the press, that if you took the jab, it would help you with your long COVID. And I could kind of wrap my head around that scientifically and say, okay, I can sort of see how this might happen. And I was hurting puppy. And so I took the vaccine. I also knew that I needed to travel, and that's turned out to be true. Good thing I've traveled. I've been all over the world, and I'm traveling all the time. And I couldn't have done the traveling that Jill and I have been doing if we didn't have that silly vaccine card. But what we did do is after the second jab, I got a bunch of adverse events. I developed hypertension with a systolic blood pressure peaking at 230. Okay, I'm lucky that I'm still alive. And if you ask me the question, am I going to take the third jab? The answer is no, I'd rather be alive. Okay? I had a number of other adverse events. And then Jill looked up on a little website called How Bad Is My Batch, and she found out that it turns out that the adverse events are clustered in certain vaccine lots. Government isn't telling us this. Another thing they're not telling us. And it turns out that the second Moderna lot that I drew from in that Russian roulette was one of the ones that's associated with a high level of death and adverse events, serious adverse events. So that's my story. And I think what you can bring to that is, here I've got all this education experience. I created the technology. I knew about the spike protein risks. I still did it because I thought it was the right thing to do for me, and it was a mistake. Now, I finally did get cleared, by the way. I didn't say this in the prior talks. A friend of mine, Dr. Meryl Nass, came down and visited us, and I was still coughing and feeling horrid. And she said, Robert, why don't you just take a protracted course of ivermectin? and I got to tell you, we just happened to I started taking the ivermectin 2 days before we went on a long hike along Big Sur because we went out to see our son. And I had been just lagging. And for the first time in months, I out-hiked the rest of the family. And so does that show that it works? I don't know. 2 days, I was really suffering before, and I got better. Unfortunately, my good friend Meryl Nass has lost her medical license for the sin of prescribing ivermectin. So that's a whole other part of the story. But what I'm trying to say is that I ask that you help me to resist this push to separate us into vaccinated and unvaccinated and turn us against each other. We're all in this together, so let's have open hearts and just try to help each other. I'm trying to help you, and I'm hoping that Ryan and I are helping arm you with knowledge and not tell you what to think, but to give you the tools so that you can think for yourself and make your own decisions. But let's not judge each other. I ask that. And no, I'm not going to take the third jab. But I'm not telling you that you should or shouldn't. What I'm saying is that the data suggests to me as an expert that we shouldn't allow the government to insert itself into our families and force us to make a decision that belongs to you as parents and grandparents. It's not their job. You know. Leave it at that. Thank you.
All right, so this is our closing piece. So to Dr. Cole, we know you're a very accomplished pathologist, but most importantly, a dad to 6 girls. I've heard you say on this stage that this is our 1776 moment. And as a mom, I'm so encouraged by that. So thank you for standing up and having courage.
Thank you.
Yes. And to Dr. Malone, we know and have known that you are a remarkable virologist and immunologist, but more importantly, a dad and a grandfather. I think it's hard to say without emotion that you have said you are ready to die on this hill for our children. And for me as a mom, like from my most humble piece of me, I know this is a war on our kids' bodies. And if we concede this land, we do not get it back. So with my whole heart, thank you for taking that stand with us and holding the line.
Like to leave with one thing. A quote from St. Augustine. The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose. It'll defend itself. Thanks a lot.
Well, on behalf of everybody here, everybody that's watching online, and people literally around the world, we do thank you for your courage. Thank you for your compassion. Thank you for stepping out, leading. Like I said at the beginning, we love you and we are with you, and together we will take this back. So thank you so much. All right, have a quick seat. I know we're going over just a little bit, but I think it was worth it, right? Those few extra minutes? Yeah. Here's what we want to do. I mentioned it at the beginning that, and Rachel even said it, it's a war. And it's not just a physical war, it's also a spiritual war. We just heard from the physical experts. I'm going to welcome up our pastor, Mike Riches, who is a senior pastor here at Harborview Fellowship. Just quickly, we don't want you to leave without knowing the reality of what we're up against.
We're just a touch late, and so we're not going to keep you. But it's important for us to understand it's more than merely the physical and the health component of what's going on right now. It is a war, and it's a war that goes to the level of the spirit, and it's a spiritual war. It's light and it's darkness. And one of the things that's tried to happen in our culture, a lot of things, two major things. Number one, division. Trying to divide and isolate because in order to conquer, you must divide. And that's what's happened. Second thing is fear. Because when fear comes upon a culture and upon a people, we don't think right. When it's the wrong kind of fear. There's a healthy fear. That's why you don't run out in the middle of I-5. There's a healthy fear, but there's also an unhealthy fear that paralyzes, that confuses, that keeps us from thinking rightly. And a lot of us are just wrestling with fear. In fact, maybe some of us are here because we've had some experiences. and we're listening to what we're hearing tonight and going, wow, what does this mean for me? What does it mean for our kids? What does it mean for our grandkids? What I'd like to do tonight is just simply pray for you and that God's peace would come upon you. And the real answer is the Prince of Peace in Jesus Christ, who died for the penalty and the punishment for all of our sin so that we could have forgiveness of that sin and eternal life. Tonight, I'm not going to walk us through a time of a spiritual transaction for that corporately. But if you're here tonight and you're not sure that you have that relationship with Jesus Christ and the Prince of Peace of this world that you know personally, I'd love for you to make your way up here as we close in just a few minutes. I would love to be able to talk with you very shortly, share with you how you can have that relationship with Jesus Christ. But right now, I'd just like to pray for you that God's peace would come upon you, rest upon you, that as we go out of here, we don't have anything to truly fear. Number one, perfect love casts out fear. Amen? And God is the source of perfect love. Secondly, maybe we are wrestling with what might have happened because maybe we have had an injection, etc. Can I say that we believe that God heals today? He created our bodies. He knows our bodies. We have seen God heal in miraculous ways. And so there's nothing to fear in that regard. And so let's stand together. Let me pray for you, then I'll turn over to Tom to dismiss us. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much that you are all wise, that you are all powerful, and that you're all knowing. And you know each and every person that is in this room right now. And you're touched with the feeling of our infirmities. We're told that in Hebrews chapter 4. And we thank you for that reality, for that comfort, and for that strength. Right now, I pray that you would release your Spirit on everyone in this room right now. Overwhelm them with your peace, the peace that passes all understanding, that perfect peace. We pray that you'll release your joy. And Lord, release your love. We need to be people of love. And we need to live in your love as it does cast out all fear. And so I pray right now, Holy Spirit, come down in a mighty and a powerful way. Be released in each and every person in this room with the warmth, the comfort, the strength, and the peace that comes from you. And I pray this in the authority of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thanks, Pastor Mike. A couple of things just to kind of give us a little bit of direction to get out of here. First of all, as many of you know who have attended the vaccine exemption workshops, we try to have One Washington be educate, organize, and activate. So pull out your cell phones. You'll see a QR code on the screen behind me. And here's what that does, if you so choose. No mandates, but if you so choose. What that'll do is that'll pull up a preloaded email. The email is addressed to the members of the Washington State Board of Health and the advisory group, technical advisory group, TAG, that is advising them on whether or not to recommend to the large board to approve vaccines as a mandated requirement for school children. Now, why would we want to email them? In order to let them know, if you so choose, that maybe they ought to think twice about mandating these vaccines. It's preloaded, the subject is in it, and it's pre-written. Modify it so it's from you. But we just want to hand you as much as we can as a starting point. Now, let me tell you why I'm writing this email, because last Thursday, they voted yes to approve the 3 criteria we just heard these gentlemen address. They've already said yes. The TAG has made a recommendation in their meeting that it is safe, effective, and prevents disease. If you think they need to hear something that they might have missed that you heard tonight, this email is a way to encourage them to remember something that is maybe most important about what we believe at One Washington, and it is this. We think the founders of this country actually got it right. when they wrote this little declaration to the King of England, part of which says this: we hold these truths to be self-evident, like the lion, self-evident, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what we think in One Washington. All of these rights come from the Creator. It is the government's job to defend those rights and protect those rights, not to act as if they have the right to grant them or subtract them from our lives. That's our philosophy. That link will also take you to the same website where we have resources. Every website that you heard referenced up here, in real time on these 4 sessions, we've been adding them to our website, so you have access to them. And so do that if you wish. It's offered as an encouragement to you, and we're so grateful. 2,000 people have been in this building the past 2 days. We held it here instead of the Tacoma Dome because the government owns the Tacoma Dome, and God owns the sanctuary, and they can't shut us down. So that's it.